The engine of my old 2003 Honda Civic rattled softly as I pulled into the long circular driveway of the Harrington estate. The car had faded paint, a cracked corner on the rear bumper, and a passenger door that only opened if you lifted the handle twice. To most people, it looked like a relic that should have been retired years ago. To me, it was a reminder. I turned off the engine and sat still for a moment, staring at the massive house in front of me. White columns, perfectly trimmed hedges, 3 luxury SUVs in the driveway. This was my wife Emily's family home, and every time I came here, something inside my chest tightened. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to come in if you don't want to," she said softly. I forced a smile. "It's your dad's birthday." "I'll survive." But deep down, I already knew tonight would be another performance, another round of quiet humiliation. Another reminder that in their eyes, I would never be enough. When we stepped out of the car, I immediately felt the shift. Her brother Daniel stood near the front door holding a glass of whiskey. The moment he saw my Civic, a grin spread across his face. "Well, look who's here," he said loudly. His wife Brittany glanced past us and chuckled. Did that thing break down in the driveway, or is it actually still running? A few people laughed. I kept my expression neutral. Emily stiffened beside me. "Daniel, stop," she muttered. But Daniel stepped closer, circling my car like it was an exhibit. "Man, I didn't know they still allowed antiques on the road." More laughter. Inside the house, the party was already in full swing. Crystal glasses, expensive wine, polished hardwood floors. Everything smelled like money. I could feel the quiet judgment the moment we walked in. Emily's mother, Margaret Harrington, approached with her signature tight smile. "Oh, Emily, sweetheart." They hugged. Then her eyes slid to me. "And, hello, Ethan." No warmth, just polite obligation. Margaret glanced back out the window toward the driveway. "You still driving that car?" I nodded calmly. "It works." She gave a soft, dismissive laugh. "Well, reliability is important when you're on a budget." Another small ripple of laughter from nearby relatives. I said nothing. Years ago, comments like that would have burned. Now they just confirmed something I had already learned. People only respect what they think they see. Dinner was worse. Daniel kept making subtle jokes. "Hey, Ethan, you want me to help you start your car later? Might need a push," Brittany added. "Or maybe we should pass a hat around so you can upgrade." Emily tried to defend me, but every time she spoke, they'd brush it off like harmless teasing. To them, I was the guy who married up. The quiet mechanic who somehow ended up with a Harrington daughter. They didn't know anything about me, and that was exactly how I intended it. Halfway through dessert, Daniel leaned back in his chair and said loudly, "So, Ethan, what exactly do you do again?" The room went quiet. I met his eyes. "I work in automotive." "Oh, right," he said, smirking. "Like oil changes and stuff?" More laughter. Margaret sipped her wine. "You know Emily could have had someone more established." Emily slammed her fork down. "That's enough." But I placed a hand gently on her arm. "It's okay." I looked around the table slowly. All those polished smiles, all that effortless arrogance. Then I said calmly, "Actually, tomorrow you should all come by the dealership." Daniel laughed. "What dealership?" I took a sip of water. "The one I own." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Daniel burst out laughing. "Oh, that's good." Brittany wiped tears from her eyes. "You own a dealership? And you drive that?" I simply nodded. "Yes." Daniel shook his head. "Sure you do, man." The conversation moved on. No one believed me. But as I walked out later that night, I glanced back at the house, and for the first time, I realized something important. They weren't just mocking my car. They were mocking the version of me they thought existed. And tomorrow, that illusion was going to shatter. The next morning began quietly. Too quietly. Emily sat at the kitchen table staring at her phone, her coffee untouched. "You didn't have to say that last night," she said gently. I poured cereal into a bowl. "Say what?" "About the dealership." I shrugged. "It's true," she sighed. "I know. But my family thinks you were joking. They're going to make fun of you again." I leaned against the counter. For a long time, I had stayed silent around the Harringtons for one reason. Emily. She loved them, even when they treated her like a trophy daughter. And I didn't want to create a war. But there was something else, too. Something older. Something deeper. 10 years earlier, I had learned a brutal truth about people. When I was 23, I worked at a small auto shop in Chicago. Long hours, grease-covered hands, cheap coffee, but I loved it. Cars made sense to me. Engines told stories. People didn't. The shop owner, Frank Keller, had been like a father figure until the day he sold the entire business and disappeared with the money meant for employee pensions. Everything I had saved was gone. My trust, my future, gone. I remember sitting on the curb outside the locked garage door that day, staring at the sign. Kela Automotive, the place where I had given 5 years of my life. That was the day something inside me changed. I stopped trusting appearances, stopped believing words. Instead, I started watching, learning, planning. Over the next decade, I worked everywhere. Small garages, auction lots, fleet services. Every place taught me something, not just about cars, about business, about leverage, about patience. And slowly, very quietly, I built something of my own. By the time I met Emily 4 years ago, I already owned a small dealership outside the city. Nothing flashy, just a steady business built from salvage auctions and smart repairs. But it grew and grew until last year, when I bought out one of the largest dealerships in the county, Harrington Autoplaza. The irony still made me smile, because the Harrington family had once tried to purchase it themselves and lost the bid. They never found out who won, until today. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Daniel, I answered. You serious about that dealership thing? I smiled slightly. You're welcome to come see. He laughed. Oh, we will. Click. 3 hours later, 4 luxury cars rolled into my dealership parking lot. Daniel stepped out first, still smiling, until he looked up. The massive sign above the building read, Harrington Auto Plaza. Owner, Ethan Carter. His smile faded. Margaret stepped out slowly. Her face went pale. Emily stood beside me near the showroom entrance. The wind moved lightly through the lot. Daniel stared at the building, then at me. You're joking. I handed him a set of keys. Welcome to my dealership. Silence. Real silence this time. And for the first time since I had met them, no one laughed. Shock does something strange to people. Sometimes it humbles them. Sometimes it exposes them. With the Harrington family, it did both. Daniel walked through the showroom slowly, running his fingers across the polished hood of a brand-new Mercedes. His earlier confidence had vanished. You actually own this place, he muttered. I nodded. Emily stood beside me, her expression unreadable. Margaret remained near the entrance, staring at the office door where my name was printed in clean silver letters. Ethan Carter, owner. You never told us, she said quietly. I met her eyes. You never asked. Her lips tightened. Daniel turned toward me again. How long? 8 years. Silence settled over the room like dust. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. That reality had finally corrected their perception. But arrogance doesn't disappear overnight. Sometimes it just changes shape. Over the next few weeks, their attitude shifted. Not kindness, opportunity. Daniel suddenly became very interested in my business. He started showing up at the dealership, asking questions, making suggestions. You could expand into luxury imports, he said one afternoon, leaning against my desk like he already worked there. I know people in finance. I listened quietly. Years of business had taught me something simple. When people change their tone overnight, they usually want something. A week later, Margaret invited Emily and me to dinner. This time the smiles were warmer, the wine more expensive. Daniel raised his glass. To family success. I watched the room carefully. People who once mocked me were suddenly eager to be close. But beneath the politeness, I sensed calculation. Then it happened. Daniel leaned forward. Ethan, I've been thinking. I already knew what was coming. You've built something impressive here, he continued. But every business needs growth capital. Margaret nodded slowly. Our family investment group could help. Emily looked confused. You have an investment group? Daniel smiled. New venture. Then he slid a folder across the table. A partnership proposal. They wanted 30% ownership of my dealership. For expansion. I flipped through the pages slowly. The numbers were clever. The language even better. But hidden inside the legal clauses was control. Board voting rights. Asset leverage. They weren't offering help. They were trying to take my company. And suddenly, everything made sense. The mocking, the curiosity, the sudden respect, they hadn't changed. They had just discovered the value of what they once laughed at. I closed the folder gently. Daniel leaned back. Well? I smiled calmly. I'll think about it. But inside my mind, something old and familiar awakened. The same quiet clarity I had felt 10 years ago outside Keller Automotive. This wasn't just about business. It was about something deeper. Respect, truth, and consequences. They had spent years underestimating me. Now they believed they could outplay me, and that was their biggest mistake. Because revenge doesn't always arrive with anger. Sometimes it arrives with patience. For the next 2 months, I played along. Carefully, quietly. Daniel began visiting the dealership almost daily. He brought spreadsheets, market projections, expansion plans. Margaret occasionally joined meetings, offering strategic advice. To them, it probably felt like progress. To me, it felt like watching a chess game unfold. Because every suggestion they made revealed something important. Their weaknesses, their assumptions, their greed. Daniel believed business was about confidence, dominance, flash. But real business was something else entirely. Timing, information, and leverage. One evening, I called my lawyer, Robert Gaines. Prepare the partnership agreement, I said. But modify Clause 7. He paused. You're sure? Yes. A week later, we signed the deal. Daniel was almost glowing. 30% ownership, just like he wanted. The celebration dinner was loud. Daniel toasted repeatedly. To family partnerships. Emily seemed uncertain but hopeful. Maybe she believed this would finally unite everyone. I wished that were true, but some lessons require reality. 3 months later, the market shifted. A major supplier bankruptcy disrupted vehicle shipments across the region. Dealership inventories crashed. Prices spiked. Many businesses panicked. Daniel certainly did. This is bad, he said during an emergency meeting. But I remained calm, because I had prepared months earlier. Through a quiet acquisition network, I had secured inventory reserves from multiple auction houses. While other dealerships struggled, we thrived. Profits surged. Daniel was thrilled. You see? My expansion strategy worked. I didn't correct him. Instead, I waited. Because the real moment hadn't arrived yet. Then one morning, Robert entered my office. It's time. We called a board meeting. Daniel arrived confident. Margaret composed. Emily nervous. I slid a document across the table. Daniel skimmed it. Then his face changed. What is this? Clause 7, I said calmly. His eyes widened. You added a performance condition. Margaret leaned forward. What condition? I folded my hands. If new partners interfere with operational decisions that harm company stability, ownership shares revert to majority control. Daniel stood up. That's ridiculous. Robert spoke calmly. You signed it. Daniel flipped through the pages frantically. Every meeting, every email, every recorded suggestion he made that disrupted operations had triggered the clause. Legally, cleanly. Margaret whispered, You planned this. Met Harringtons. You tried to take my company. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. You manipulated us? No, I said quietly. You underestimated me. And in that moment, the same people who once laughed at my old car realized they had just lost everything they tried to gain. The room felt colder after that. Not physically, emotionally. Daniel stood frozen beside the conference table, his face flushed with anger. You set us up, he said. His voice trembled. Margaret didn't speak. She simply stared at me. The kind of stare people give when a story they believed suddenly collapses. For years, they had written me into their lives as a background character, the quiet mechanic, the underachiever who got lucky marrying Emily, and now they were discovering something terrifying. They had never understood the story at all. Robert gathered his papers calmly. The legal transition will finalize within 72 hours, he said. Daniel laughed bitterly. You think this is over? I tilted my head slightly. It is. But the real twist didn't come from anger. It came from Emily. She had been silent through most of the meeting, watching, listening. Now she stood up slowly and placed her wedding ring on the table. The soft metallic sound echoed in the quiet room. Daniel blinked. Margaret looked confused. Emily turned toward me. I didn't know, she said softly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. I felt something tighten in my chest. You didn't know what? I asked. That my family would try to take your business. I nodded. I suspected. She shook her head. No, that's not what I mean. She looked down at the ring. You spent years hiding who you really were, building this whole life in secret, testing people. Her eyes met mine. Infamy. The words hit harder than Daniel's anger ever could. I never tested you, I said quietly. She gave a sad smile. Ethan, you drove that car for 4 years. I glanced toward the window where my old Civic sat in the parking lot. Paint faded, door slightly crooked. You know why I kept it, I said. Because it reminds you where you started, she said gently. I nodded. Yes? She looked around the conference room. At some point, that reminder turned into a shield. Her voice softened. And you stopped letting anyone really know you. Daniel scoffed. Oh, please, now you're defending him? Emily ignored him. She kept looking at me. I married a man who was humble and kind, she said. But somewhere along the way, you started preparing for war with everyone. Silence settled in the room again, this time heavier, because she wasn't entirely wrong. Years of betrayal had trained my mind to anticipate deception everywhere, to plan, to guard, to control outcomes, and today, that mindset had won. But victories can still leave strange emptiness behind. Emily slid the ring toward me across the table. I'm not angry, she said. I'm just realizing I don't know who you really are anymore. Then she walked out. Margaret followed slowly. Daniel lingered for a moment before leaving. His anger had cooled into something quieter. Respect. Reluctant. But real. Soon the room was empty. Only Robert and I remained. You expected that? He asked. I looked at the ring resting on the polished wood table. No. He nodded thoughtfully. Revenge rarely ends the way we imagine. He left a few minutes later. I stayed behind. The dealership floor below buzzed with normal activity. Salespeople talking. Engines starting. Life continuing. Through the window, I saw my Civic again. The car everyone laughed at. The car that carried every mile of my past. I picked up the ring and turned it slowly between my fingers. For years, I had believed patience and intelligence could control outcomes. That if you played the game carefully enough, you could win. But some things weren't games. Not love. Not trust. Those things couldn't be engineered. They could only be given. Or lost. I walked downstairs and stepped outside. The late afternoon sun reflected softly off the dealership windows. The Civic door creaked open the way it always had. I sat in the driver's seat. The engine started with the same tired rumble. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel something other than strategy. Regret. Because defeating your enemies can feel satisfying. But realizing what the victory cost, that's a different kind of truth. Power proves who was right. But time proves what was worth losing to win.